She was just 8 barefoot scrubbing the floor in silence while the family gathered inside toasting the real granddaughter. But when a passing single dad stepped through the kitchen door and saw her, everything changed. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. And it rewrote every rule about love, belonging, and the kind of family we choose. If stories like this speak to your heart, go ahead and subscribe so you won't miss the ones that stay with you long after the last word. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Bo Thatcher wasn't supposed to be there that night. His shift had ended 2 hours earlier, and he should have been home microwaving a bowl of chicken pot pie while his old Labrador Murphy snored by the heater. But the sous chef had called in sick, and when Bo's phone rang, he didn't hesitate. The wedding was for a family he'd cooked for back in his fine dining days before life crumbled, and he still owed the restaurant manager a favor. The ballroom shimmered in soft, golden light. Crystal chandeliers dripped elegance. The laughter of the rich floated like perfume through the air. Bo moved silently through the kitchen, flipping crab cakes, with muscle memory keeping his head down. He didn't belong in that world anymore, not since Nora died. He was about to return to the prep station when he noticed a strange flicker of movement near the back corridor where the cleaning supplies were kept. Something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the stiffness in the air, or the way the light glinted off a puddle that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. He followed the instinct that had never failed him as a father. The narrow hallway was dim, cold. As he rounded the corner, he saw her, a little girl maybe 8 years old kneeling on the tile floor. She was furiously scrubbing with a rag twice the size of her hands. Her fingers were raw, her knees red against the soaked linoleum. She wore a frilly pale pink dress, one that didn't belong to this setting of mop buckets and industrial bleach. Her shoes' patent leather sat discarded by the door. Bo froze. She didn't see him at first. Her small shoulders trembled under the weight of invisible orders. She muttered to herself, barely audible. They said, "I have to finish before the cake. I'm not the real one anyway." He stepped closer, slowly, gently. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay?" She jolted upright, startled but didn't scream, just stared. Her eyes were huge, hazel with golden specks, and filled with a mix of fear, confusion, and something else Bo hadn't seen in a child's eyes for a long time, resignation. "Who told you to clean this?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She wiped her hands on the hem of her dress, embarrassed. "Grandma. She said I needed to stay useful. Juniper gets to be with the guests, 'cause she's her real granddaughter." Bo felt something crack deep in his chest. He crouched down to her level, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "What's your name?" he asked. "Saffron," she whispered. "Saffron," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Bo." She looked at him uncertain. Bo stood up, unbuttoned his chef's jacket, and gently draped it over her shoulders. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. Her little hand slid into his without a word. Bo didn't think. He walked out of that back hallway past the stainless steel trays and the watchful eyes of the kitchen staff. Out through the swinging double doors and into the ballroom. The music was playing. Guests were clinking glasses. A spotlight circled the dance floor where the bride and groom twirled in bliss. And there, seated at the family table, was a young girl about Saffron's age, dressed in the same shade of pink, polished, pampered, posed. Juniper. Heads began to turn. Bo kept walking Saffron beside him, barefoot and quiet jacket hanging awkwardly off her shoulders like a flag of forgotten dignity. The bride paused mid-spin. The groom blinked. Murmurs rose. Bo found the elderly woman he assumed was Grandma, Mirabelle Vale, diamond brooch, cold eyes, thin smile that cracked only when necessary. She looked up. "What is the meaning of this?" she snapped. Beau met her gaze steady. "This little girl," he said, "was scrubbing your kitchen floor, while your other granddaughter was being toasted by strangers. That child," Mirabelle said, each word laced with venom, "is not my granddaughter." Silence fell like a sheet over the room. Saffron's hand tightened in Beau's. He turned to the crowd, not caring anymore about his job, his bills, or the decorum they all worshipped like gods. "She may not be your blood," he said quietly, "but she's still a child, a human being. And tonight, not one of you thought to ask where she was." Then he turned and walked out. They sat in Beau's old truck heater humming. Saffron sipped hot cocoa from a to-go cup he snagged from the restaurant's break room before they left. She didn't say much, just stared out the window jacket still wrapped around her like armor. Beau watched her from the driver's seat, the storm of thoughts in his chest louder than the rain on the windshield. He wasn't supposed to get involved, but he'd seen that look before in the mirror, back when grief had hollowed him out. He'd seen it in his daughter's eyes too during those first few months after Nora's accident. He couldn't unsee it again. Saffron finally looked up. "Are you going to take me back?" Beau shook his head slowly. "No, honey. Not tonight." She nodded once, then curled up against the door and fell asleep. Beau sat there a long time, and as the rain softened and the wipers slowed, he realized something. This wasn't just about rescuing a little girl from a cruel moment. It was about rescuing them both from the floor the world made them kneel on. Beau woke before dawn as he always did. He padded into the kitchen in wool socks, careful not to make a sound. The tiny beach house he'd inherited from his mother creaked in all the familiar ways, just enough to remind him it was still standing. Still holding stories within its walls. But this morning, the house felt different, as if something fragile and sacred had been left on the kitchen counter overnight. Through the cracked door of the guest room, he heard steady breathing. Saffron was still asleep, curled under the patchwork quilt his daughter once adored. Her tiny frame barely made a dent in the mattress, yet her presence filled the room. Beau leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing a hand through his unruly dark hair. He knew he should call someone, maybe child services, maybe the police. But every part of him recoiled at the thought. He didn't know Saffron's full story yet, but he knew enough someone had looked at her and seen less, and he wouldn't be another person who did that. Instead, he brewed coffee and stared out the window at the rising sun, unsure if he was doing the right thing. Only certain he'd never forgive himself if he returned her to the people who made her scrub floors in a party dress. By 9 a.m., Saffron was up and sitting at his kitchen table, legs swinging as she watched him make pancakes. Beau slid a plate in front of her. She blinked at the stack. "These are for me, sure are." A long pause, then a whisper. "I've never had this many pancakes before." Beau hesitated, then sat down across from her. "You hungry?" She nodded. But she didn't eat right away. She just looked at the food like it might vanish if she touched it too quickly. Beau let the silence breathe. After a few bites, she looked up and asked, "Am I in trouble?" Beau shook his head. "No. But we're going to find your mom today." "Okay." Saffron's fork stopped midair. "She didn't know I was at the wedding. Grandma said she needed help in the kitchen, and Mom had to stay home. Do you know where home is?" She nodded, a little more hopeful now. "It's in Coral Bend, on Ivy Street. Yellow door, lots of stairs." Beau smiled. That's a start. They drove to Coral Bend, a quieter part of town, where the sidewalks cracked with age, and the roses bloomed wildly in untamed gardens. Beau found the yellow door easily. It leaned slightly to the left, and the steps were lined with terracotta pots full of wilting herbs. A wind chime made from silverware tinkled softly above the porch. He knocked. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her early 30s, sitting in a motorized wheelchair. Her long auburn hair was pulled into a low bun, and she wore a faded apron over a soft blue sweater. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert, piercing even, and when she saw Saffron standing behind Bo, they filled with tears. "Safi," she whispered. Saffron ran forward and threw her arms around her mother's neck. The woman embraced her tightly, closing her eyes, as if breathing her child in. Bo stood back, hands in his coat pockets, not wanting to intrude. But the woman looked up at him and offered a trembling smile. "You must be the man who brought her back." Bo nodded. "Bo Thatcher." "I didn't mean to intrude. She was well working at the wedding. I couldn't leave her there." The woman exhaled sharply, half laughing, half crying. Of course she was. Mirabelle has a way of rewriting rules, including ones about children. Mirabelle's your mother. The woman nodded, bitterness flickering across her face. "I'm Elowen Vale. And yes, she's my mother, though she hasn't called me her daughter in years." Bo took a step closer. She said Saffron isn't really her granddaughter. Elowen's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed calm. "She's not technically. I wasn't married. The father disappeared before Saffron was born. That was enough for Mirabelle to write us both off." Bo felt heat rise in his chest. "So she made your daughter clean her floors instead of letting her attend her cousin's wedding." "She doesn't see her as family," Elowen said flatly. "Not really." There was a silence, then deep and raw. Bo looked at the worn floor behind Elowen's chair, at the boxes stacked near the walls, at the small kitchen through the open doorway, bare shelves, chipped tiles. He could feel the weight of years pressing in from every corner. "You okay here?" he asked quietly. Elowen lifted her chin. "We get by. I do what I can. I used to cook back when I had a job that paid more than pity wages. But after the car accident, well, kitchens aren't built for wheelchairs." Bo nodded slowly. "Mine is." She looked at him, unsure what to make of that. "I have a small place by the beach," he explained. "It's not fancy, but it's got a wide kitchen, a second bedroom, and a stove that could use someone who knows what they're doing." Elowen tilted her head. "Are you offering me a job?" Bo smiled. "I'm offering you a place to stand again, even if you're sitting." She blinked, stunned. "You don't even know me." I didn't know Saffron either, but I knew enough. A long pause. Then Elowen whispered, "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Bo turned to go, but Saffron rushed forward, grabbing his coat. "Can I come with you again?" "Just for a little while." Bo knelt to her level, meeting her eyes. "That's up to your mom." Elowen looked at her daughter, then at Bo, and something inside her softened. "One night," she said. "But only if you bring her back with pancakes." Bo chuckled. "Deal." The beach house sat low against the dunes, tucked like a secret between wind-bleached fences and wild lavender. When Bo opened the front door, with Saffron at his side, the place felt almost reverent, like it too had been holding its breath. The house wasn't grand. The wood floors creaked, and the wallpaper in the hallway peeled at the corners. But the scent that lingered, vanilla salt and something like cinnamon trapped in the grain of old timber, felt like memory. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and more importantly, it had a kitchen. Bo watched as Saffron skipped ahead and dropped her small backpack near the couch. She paused in front of the refrigerator, like it was some kind of museum piece. "Can I get water fridge door top shelf?" Bo replied, already moving toward the sink. "Grab 2 cups." She opened the door carefully, her movements precise, like she'd been taught not to touch too much. It made something twist in Bo's chest. As he filled the kettle, he glanced across the room his daughter once used to dart across that same tile in socked feet, chasing Murphy with a wooden spoon. That spoon now sat in the drawer beside the sink. He hadn't opened that drawer in nearly a year. Saffron stood quietly beside him, her cup clasped in both hands. Bo offered her a wink. "We'll warm up cocoa in a bit. You ever try it with marshmallows?" She smiled, just barely, but it was there. "Only once. I wasn't supposed to, but the neighbor let me." "Well," Bo said, turning to the cupboard tonight, "we break rules for a good cause." That night, after Saffron drifted to sleep wrapped in his daughter's old quilt, Bo found himself staring at the stove. It was a vintage O'Keefe and Merritt cream enamel with chrome accents. His mother used to say it had a soul temperamental and noble. This stove, she once said, hands on hips, and eyes shining only cooks for people who deserve to be fed with love. Bo hadn't cooked on it in months, not since Nora's passing. He'd used the microwave, the toaster oven, a borrowed griddle at the back of the community center. But that stove had sat cold. Tonight he reached out and placed a palm on the cool metal. For a moment it felt like reaching into his past. And then, almost like the stove breathed back. He lit the burner. It caught on the first try. The next morning, Bo kept his promise pancakes this time, with blueberries and whipped cream. Saffron devoured hers. Between bites, she asked questions that came out of nowhere. "Did you always live here? Why did your wife die? Do you miss her still?" Bo answered each question with a gentle honesty that surprised even himself. "Yes, mostly. A car accident. A bad one. Every day. But it gets softer." She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on. "That's what Mama says about pain. It gets quieter, not gone." He smiled at her. "Your Mama's smart." That afternoon, the beach wind picked up scattering leaves across the deck and whistling through the eaves. Bo carried a box of old cookware from the shed into the kitchen, placing it on the counter. He hadn't needed the extra pans for years, but something told him it was time to dust them off. He paused, then reached under the counter and pulled out the old recipe box. It had belonged to his mother, worn wood-metal clasp index cards written in her swooping script. Some were smudged with butter, others curled at the edges. He hadn't opened it since her funeral. The lid creaked as he lifted it. Inside, nestled between cards for beef stew and lemon tarts, was the one recipe that always stayed near the top. Harvest Heart Bread, a dense, slightly sweet loaf with cinnamon, nutmeg, and honey-soaked walnuts. His mother had baked it every October, calling it the bread that remembers. Bo hadn't touched the card in years. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he called into the living room, "Saffron. You ever baked before?" She was in the kitchen within seconds, eyes wide with curiosity. Bo handed her a small apron, faded yellow, with a pocket stitched like a smile. "Let's make a memory." They mixed ingredients slowly, deliberately. He taught her to measure flour with a butter knife edge, to crack eggs, clean to fold walnuts in with care. She followed every instruction with reverent focus, asking questions in a soft, determined voice. When the dough was ready, Bo guided her hands as she kneaded. Her fingers, still small and bruised from the week before, pressed into the dough like she was sculpting a new world. They shaped it into a loaf and placed it into a greased pan. Bo opened the oven door. The stove, for the first time in so long, glowed like a hearth. As the bread baked, a warmth filled the house that wasn't just from the heat. It was the scent of cinnamon honey and something deeper. Something that had been lost and now miraculously was returning. When the timer dinged, they pulled the loaf out together. It crackled as it cooled, and Bo sliced off 2 thick pieces. He handed one to Saffron. She bit in, closed her eyes, and let out a sigh that sounded like relief. Bo watched her quietly. "Do you think my mama would like this?" she asked. "I know she would." They sat in silence, eating warm bread as the sun dipped below the dunes. Later that night, after Saffron had gone to bed, Bo stood alone in the kitchen. He ran his hand along the countertop, the recipe card still lying there. Then he took a pen and scribbled something in the margin just beneath his mother's looping title, baked with saffron, the first smile in a long time. He tucked the card back into the box, turned off the lights, and whispered to the empty kitchen. She's not just visiting. She's healing me, too. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window, like honey, thick, golden, slow. Saffron stood barefoot on a chair, her elbows perched on the counter, eyes trained on the wooden recipe box, as if it were a locked treasure chest. "Can I open it again?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Beau glanced up from the sink where he was rinsing blueberries for their morning pancakes. He saw the look on her face, hopeful, reverent, and he nodded. "Sure, just be gentle. Those cards are older than both of us put together." Saffron giggled, then slowly unlatched the brass clasp. Inside were dozens of index cards, some yellowed with time, others warped with use. Each one held a handwritten recipe in the neat curling script of Beau's mother. "Your mom wrote all of these?" she asked, leafing through them with clean hands. Every single one, Beau said. She believed good food was like music meant to be shared, not hoarded. Saffron pulled out a card and read it aloud. "Rosemary orange chicken with gravy for Sunday nights." She wrinkled her nose. "That sounds like a spell." Beau laughed. It kind of was. She could fix a broken heart with a skillet and a stick of butter. Saffron kept digging, reading titles like they were chapters in a magical novel. Peach cobbler for forgiveness, cider brisket when he calls lemon loaf for sad mornings. Then she froze. "What's this one?" she asked, holding up a worn, smudged card. Beau stepped closer. His heart skipped. "Butter rum cake for when he comes home." He hadn't seen that card in years. It had been Nora's favorite. Beau's wife. She used to joke that it wasn't a cake recipe at all. It was a test. If the man loved the cake, he'd stick around. Beau touched the edge of the card gently, as if it might disappear. "That one. That's a special one. Can we make it?" Beau hesitated. He hadn't tasted that cake since the night before Nora's accident. She had baked it just for him, without occasion, without a reason, just because love needed space to show up. He took a long breath and nodded. "Yeah, kiddo. We can." It took the better part of the afternoon. Saffron insisted on reading each step out loud like a ceremony. "Cream the butter till it sings," she said, giggling. "Add rum in slow tears," she read with wide eyes. Beau laughed. "That's not tears, it's teaspoons. But it works both ways." Flour flew, vanilla spilled, butter melted. And when they finally poured the golden batter into the bundt pan and slid it into the oven, the house smelled like something holy. Beau stood by the counter watching her. He didn't speak for a while. Then, almost too softly to catch, "Do you miss her?" Your mom, Saffron, didn't look away from the oven light, only when it's quiet. But mostly, I think she misses herself. Beau leaned against the counter, arms folded. "That makes sense. She used to laugh a lot," Saffron said. She had a big laugh, like from the belly. Beau smiled. "That's the best kind. She hasn't laughed since the crash." Maybe, Beau said gently, she just needs a different reason. Later that evening, they packed the cooled cake into a bakery box Beau had kept in the pantry, tied it with twine, and drove toward Ivy Street. The yellow house looked the same, weathered and tired, but this time the porch light was on. Beau rang the bell cake in hand, and Saffron stood tall beside him, proud as if she'd made the dessert for a state fair. Elowen answered in her wheelchair, her red hair tied loosely, and her eyes surprised. "You brought me something," she asked. Beau held up the cake box. "We figured you could use something sweet." She took it, her hands shaking just slightly. "You didn't have to." "But we wanted to," Saffron interrupted, stepping forward. "This is butter rum cake for when he comes home. From your stove to ours." Elowen blinked at the title, then laughed a short, breathy sound that broke like a window in spring. "That's quite a name." Saffron beamed. "It's the first recipe we made from the box. The first that felt like more than food." Elowen opened the box, peered in, and then she stopped. Bo watched her face soften, watched the memory wash over her like a tide. "I remember this smell," she said. "I baked something like this once before the accident. It filled the whole apartment." We danced in the kitchen. Bo said nothing, letting the moment carry itself. Elowen looked up slowly. "Would you two like to stay for dinner?" They ate on folding chairs in the living room, plates balanced on laps, laughter weaving between bites of pasta and awkward sips of lemonade. Elowen had cooked a simple garlic fettuccine with roasted tomatoes, and though her movements were slow, every gesture felt intentional, graceful. Bo noticed how the light shifted in her as she cooked, the way her voice carried again, the way she told a joke halfway through stirring the sauce. It wasn't just food. It was her reclaiming something she'd lost. After dinner, Saffron fell asleep, curled in a blanket on the sofa. Bo and Elowen sat quietly watching the girl's chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. "She's safe with you," Elowen said softly. "I hope she feels that way." "She does," she said, then added, "So do I." Bo met her eyes. "I meant what I said. My kitchen's wide. My stove's lonely. And we could use more of your sauce." Elowen smiled slowly, cautiously. "Are you offering me a job again?" He chuckled. "No, this time I'm offering you a place at the table." It started with one loaf of bread. Bo didn't mean for it to be anything more than a quiet gesture. He and Saffron had baked it the night before, a warm molasses-rich loaf from the recipe box titled Autumn Wheat for Gathering Days. He brought it to his neighbor May Jenkins, who had recently lost her husband of 53 years. She opened the door, took one whiff of the loaf, and burst into tears. Not the wrenching kind, but soft, grateful ones, like someone had reached through time and handed her a memory she thought was gone. That was the first delivery. By the end of the week, Bo and Saffron had made 5 more loaves for 5 more neighbors each, with a small card tucked inside that simply read, "A taste of warmth from the stove by the sea." Saffron named it Bread Day. And like most of her ideas, it stuck. Every Friday morning, she and Bo woke early, tied on aprons, hers still too big, and cinched with a clothespin, and picked 3 or 4 recipes from the box. Sometimes Elowen joined them, her wheelchair nestled at the corner of the kitchen, a wooden spoon in hand, directing like a conductor, guiding a symphony. Their rhythm developed naturally. Saffron measured and sifted. Bo stirred and handled the heavy lifting. Elowen, once unsure of her place, began experimenting again, adding citrus zest to banana loaves, swapping in rosemary where cinnamon once ruled. Each batch bore their fingerprints, their stories, and the town began to notice. It was May Jenkins who first suggested the obvious. "You should sell these," she said, one Saturday morning, holding a still warm scone to her heart. "I haven't had anything like this since my wedding day." Bo smiled, brushing flour from his forearm. "We're just sharing." "Well," she said, fixing him with the stern look of a retired school principal, "maybe it's time the town shared back." By the second week of September, the front window of Bo's house bore a hand-painted sign courtesy of Saffron and her neon markers, the hearth breads, bites, and belonging. Open Fridays. Donations. Welcome. Smiles required. They didn't advertise. They didn't need to. The scent did the work, cinnamon and yeast and brown butter curling out toward the sidewalk like a whisper of welcome. People came slowly. At first, a retired fisherman, a tired mother with twin toddlers, a mailman with a sweet tooth. Then came the old couples, the lonely teens, a few tourists who wandered too far off the main road and found something they didn't know they were missing. And in the center of it all, Beau, Elowen, and Saffron, a makeshift family. One Friday near the end of the month, Beau stepped onto the porch just before opening and paused. The line stretched down the sidewalk, dozens of people. Some he knew, others he didn't. But they were there, waiting, laughing, holding coffee cups and folding chairs and dogs on leashes. Beau turned to Elowen, who had wheeled herself beside him with a fresh tray of cardamom braids, balanced carefully in her lap. "You seeing this?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I am." Beau let out a low whistle. This isn't just bread anymore. Elowen looked out over the crowd. It's connection. You gave them more than warm crusts and soft centers. You gave them a reason to gather. Beau swallowed hard. "We gave them." She looked at him, then truly looked, and in her eyes he saw not just the woman who had survived grief and injury and rejection, but the girl she must have once been. The one who believed food could fix things, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe it too. Inside, Saffron had donned her honorary head baker sash, constructed from leftover ribbon and too many stickers. She greeted each customer like an old friend, handing out bread, wrapped in wax paper, and folded napkins bearing handwritten notes. One old man took a bite of lemon honey rye and said quietly, "This tastes like my mother's kitchen 1952. Then he handed her a $20 bill and refused change. Saffron tucked the bill into the donation jar, looked up at Beau, and whispered, "I think this is the best job ever." Beau chuckled. "It's not bad." Later that night, after the crowd dispersed and the house smelled like cooling dough and lavender soap, Beau found Elowen on the back deck. She sat with her eyes on the horizon, a light blanket over her lap, her hair loose and curling in the salt air. "You did good today," Beau said. "We did good," she corrected. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elowen spoke quietly. "Do you ever feel like this is what we were supposed to do all along?" Beau leaned back in the chair beside her. "Yeah, I do." She turned toward him. "I'm scared to want this." He met her gaze. "Me too. I mean, what if it doesn't last? Then we keep baking." She laughed, really laughed, and Beau felt the sound settle into his chest like a steady drumbeat. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" she asked. "I'm terrified," he replied. "But somehow, you and Saffron make it feel okay." She looked down at her hands. "You ever think maybe this isn't just kindness?" Beau tilted his head. "What do you mean? I mean," her voice trembled. "What if this is love pretending it's just helping?" The question floated between them, delicate and dangerous. Beau didn't answer right away. He reached over slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I think love has always been quiet like that," he said. "It kneads itself into things until we don't know where it begins and we end." Elowen didn't move. She just smiled, eyes shining, and whispered, "Then I hope it rises well." Beau chuckled, then leaned closer. And for the first time since he'd lost Nora, he didn't feel like he was betraying the past by choosing the present. The knock came just after noon on a crisp Saturday. Beau was kneading dough in the kitchen forearms dusted with flour when Saffron peered through the front window and froze. Her breath caught hand still on the curtain. Beau looked up from the counter, instantly alert. "What is it?" he asked. Saffron turned slowly. "It's her." Beau wiped his hands on a towel, moved to the window, and saw a black town car parked just beyond the garden gate. The door stood open. And there, standing impossibly straight in a tailored cream coat, was Mirabelle Vale. She hadn't aged as much as Beau expected. Her silver hair was pulled into a flawless chignon. Her shoes were narrow-pointed and impractical for gravel. But her eyes, steel blue, sharp, cold, were exactly as Saffron had described them. Beau's jaw tightened. She doesn't get to take you back, he said firmly. Saffron didn't answer. She just stood still, arms wrapped around her stomach, as if bracing for a storm she'd already lived through once. Beau opened the front door before Mirabelle had the chance to knock again. She gave him a thin smile, one that never touched her eyes. "Mr. Thatcher," she said, "you've made quite the name for yourself in this little corner of town. Fresh bread and noble gestures." Beau didn't step aside. "What do you want?" "I'm here for my granddaughter. She's not yours. She's Elowen's child. Elowen is my daughter. That makes the girl mine by blood and legal precedent." Beau's voice was low and even. "Blood doesn't mean belonging. You proved that when you left her scrubbing floors while the other one danced." Mirabelle's lips thinned. "You're sentimental. That's dangerous in adults." Beau stepped forward. "You don't scare me, Mrs. Vale. And Saffron isn't going anywhere unless her mother says so." That finally made her blink. "She's here?" Mirabelle asked, almost uncertain for the first time. "She is," came a voice from behind Beau. "Elowen." She wheeled onto the porch, slowly wearing a navy cardigan and her old chef's apron, a smear of flour on her temple like war paint. Mirabelle's expression flickered. "Elowen. You look like a woman who found her feet again," Elowen said, voice steady. "Even if I'm still sitting." Mirabelle's posture stiffened. "This is a foolish act of defiance," No Mother Elowen said quietly. "This is a boundary." Saffron stepped outside, then quietly taking Beau's hand. Mirabelle looked at her, like one might regard a ghost, familiar, but uninvited. "You left her in a utility closet with a mop," Elowen continued. "You didn't see her as family. You barely saw her as human. And now that people are whispering about the girl from the hearth, you've decided she matters again." "She is a Vale," Mirabelle said sharply. "She has a responsibility. She has a childhood bow cut in. And it's not for sale." Mirabelle glanced around the porch at the worn swing, the potted rosemary, the flour-dusted doormat, and her mouth twisted with disdain. "You've made her into a mascot. A pity project." "No," Elowen said, her voice stronger now. "We've made her home." There was silence. For a moment, the only sound was the breeze sifting through the beach grass. Then softly, Saffron spoke. "I don't want to come with you," she said, looking directly at her grandmother. "Not today. Not ever." Mirabelle looked genuinely stunned. You don't get to say that, she replied, voice brittle, but Saffron didn't flinch. "I just did." Beau expected shouting, threats, legal warnings. But instead, Mirabelle stepped back, her hands adjusting the cuffs of her coat. "Very well," she said coldly. "You want to be ordinary, so be it. But don't come knocking when the glitter wears off." Elowen smiled, small, sad, and unshaken. "We prefer bread to glitter anyway." With that, Mirabelle turned, climbed into the car, and drove away, leaving only the crunch of tires on gravel and a strange hollowness in the air. Beau let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Elowen reached for Saffron's hand. "You okay, love?" Saffron nodded. I didn't shake, not even once. Beau ruffled her hair. "That's 'cause you stood tall where it counted." That night, the hearth stayed open later than usual. Word had spread fast, of course it had, and the regulars came by not just for baked goods, but for something more potent, quiet celebration. They brought candles, folded notes of encouragement. A woman from the council gifted Saffron a hand-sewn apron embroidered with, "You are enough. Always." At the counter, Elowen baked without pausing. Her hands remembered recipes her heart once feared. Beau moved like the room knew him. And Saffron, radiant, confident, took orders, made jokes, offered tiny honey cakes to toddlers. At one point, Beau paused to watch them both, Elowen and Saffron, and felt it in his chest, like thunder wrapped in peace. They weren't surviving anymore. they were becoming. Later, after the last guest left and the porch light dimmed, Bo found Elowen sitting on the back deck, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. He sat beside her. I wasn't sure how that would end, he admitted. She smiled into the steam. Me neither. Bo looked at her, really looked, and said, "You were incredible today." "So were you," she said. Then after a beat, she used to make me feel small, like I had to earn her love. "You don't owe anyone your worth," Bo said gently, especially not someone who couldn't see it. Elowen nodded. But I needed someone to remind me of that. Bo looked at her heart full. "I didn't remind you," he said softly. "You remembered all on your own. I just held the space until you did." She looked at him, then eyes full of something new. Trust, yes, but also the shimmer of something deeper. And maybe it had been waiting all along. The storm rolled in just before dawn. The windows of the beach house rattled lightly as wind tugged at the eaves and waves pounded the shore harder than usual. Bo awoke to the distant rumble of thunder, then the soft shuffle of feet just outside his room. He stepped into the hallway and found Saffron already awake, standing barefoot in her favorite oversized sweater, cradling the old recipe box in her arms. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. The thunder sounded like someone knocking. Bo smiled gently. "No ghosts here, kiddo. Just weather with a temper." Saffron nodded but didn't move. Bo gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on. I think this morning calls for cinnamon toast and warm apple cider." They worked quietly in the soft yellow light of the kitchen, Bo slicing the bread they'd baked yesterday. Saffron dusting each slice with sugar and cinnamon like she was blessing them. Elowen wheeled in just as the toast was browning, wrapped in a flannel shawl, eyes still sleepy. Smells like my childhood," she murmured. Bo poured cider into mugs. That was the plan. Saffron brought the recipe box over and opened it carefully in front of Elowen. "We thought we'd pick something cozy." Want to help Elowen reached in fingers trailing across the cards like they were old friends. She pulled one out near the back, one Bo didn't recognize right away. The card was slightly water damaged, and the ink had bled in places. On the top, in Bo's mother's looping handwriting, was written, "For when he needs to know the truth." Beneath the recipe for honey almond scones taped to the back of the card was an envelope. Bo stilled. "What's that?" Saffron asked. Elowen gently peeled the envelope from the back and turned it over. In faded blue ink, one word was written, Bo. His name. In his mother's handwriting. Bo swallowed hard. "I didn't know this was in here," he said. He opened it slowly, carefully, like the paper itself might crack. Inside was a single sheet of stationery folded once. "My Bo. If you're reading this, it means the box found its way to the right hands. I never was good at talking about feelings face to face. That's why I baked. That's why I left you this mess of flour and sugar and hope. There's something you need to know. I saw what Nora saw in you long before you did. You were always the kind of man who protected quietly, who stepped in when no one was looking. You were your father's heart and my steadiness combined. But I also saw how you shut down after she died. And I know what you're thinking. How dare I write this from beyond? But son, grief doesn't end you. It asks you to change, to grow. And when the time comes that someone new shows up in your kitchen, not just in your house, but in your kitchen, you'll know what to do. Don't be afraid to love again. Love isn't a betrayal. It's the only way to survive. So make the scones. Bo, then tell her." Mom. Bo stared at the letter for a long time. He read it twice, then a third time. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the low whistle of wind outside. Saffron climbed onto the chair beside him, eyes full of gentle curiosity. "Are you okay?" Bo nodded, blinking quickly. "Yeah, sweetheart. He looked at Elowen. "I just didn't know how much she still knew me." Elowen said nothing, only reached out and squeezed his hand. They made the scones together that morning. It felt sacred. They moved as one saffron-zesting lemon Elowen, measuring flour with a steady hand, Bo whisking with quiet focus. The house filled with the scent of butter and almond-sweet citrus and memory. The first batch came out golden and tender. Bo wrapped 3 in a napkin and stepped outside for a moment. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, but the rain had paused. He looked out toward the horizon, took a breath, and said softly into the wind, "Thanks, Mom." Then he came back in, and the world somehow felt steadier. That afternoon, while Saffron napped under a pile of quilts, and Murphy snored by her feet, Bo and Elowen sat on the back porch, sharing the last 2 scones and mugs of strong tea. Elowen held the letter in her lap. She hadn't asked to read it, but Bo had offered it anyway. Now she folded it carefully and handed it back. She was a remarkable woman, she said. She was, Bo agreed, stubborn, soft and secret, could bake forgiveness into shortbread. Elowen smiled. "You're a lot like her." Bo looked at her. "I hope so." Then after a pause, "There's more I want to say, but I keep thinking maybe it's too soon." Elowen leaned in slightly. "I'm listening." Bo hesitated, then said, "I think..." My heart started beating again the day I saw Saffron in that kitchen, and every day since it's gotten louder. You and her, this house, this kitchen, you brought me back to myself. Elowen's eyes shimmered. "I was broken when I got here," she whispered. "But your home gave me room to rebuild." Bo reached out, brushed a crumb from her lower lip, then let his hand linger along her cheek. "We don't have to name it yet," he said. "But it's real. Whatever this is, it's real." She nodded. "It is." He leaned in slow and certain and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss that said, "I see you. I respect you. I'm not going anywhere." And she closed her eyes, letting herself believe it. That night, as the wind picked up again and the storm returned in earnest, Bo tucked the letter back into the recipe box, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Because sometimes truth isn't a reckoning, it's a recipe. And love, he was beginning to understand, wasn't a single flavor. It was a full meal, warm, messy, and worth waiting for. It began with a dropped mixing bowl. Not a dramatic crash, just a soft clatter against tile enough to make Saffron spin around and Bo rush into the kitchen with a towel already in hand. But what they saw made them freeze. Elowen wasn't in her chair. She was standing, wobbly, pale, breath held like a tightrope walker. But she was up. Her hands clutched the edge of the counter, and one foot, just one, was rooted firm on the floor, while the other trembled behind it, heel barely grazing the tile. Bo dropped the towel. "Elowen," he said softly, as if a louder voice might startle the moment into vanishing. She looked up at him, and for a beat, her eyes filled with the quiet terror of someone who had been told for too long what wasn't possible. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't come from joy alone, but from defiance, grit, and something more ancient than hope. I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I just reached." Bo didn't move. He knew better than to run forward to help, to make it about anything other than what it was, her moment. Saffron's voice broke the silence. "Mom," she whispered, "you're doing it." Elowen began to shake, and then just like that, her knees buckled. Bo caught her before she hit the floor. Not like a hero, just a man who had waited years to lift someone, not because they were falling, but because they had tried. He helped her sit on the kitchen bench, her breath's ragged tears clinging to her lashes. "I'm okay," she said, laughing through the ache. "I'm okay." "You stood," Saffron said, hands clasped like a prayer. "You stood." "Mama." Elowen nodded, touching her thigh as if to confirm the truth of it. It wasn't long, but it was real. Bo crouched beside her. "You don't have to do it all today. I wasn't planning to," she replied, a spark returning to her tone. "But this kitchen, it's where I feel strongest," he smiled. "That's because it's yours now, too." The news spread through the neighborhood before the end of the day, not because they told anyone, but because stories like this have a way of traveling without permission. By Friday, customers who came to the hearth weren't just asking for walnut scones or the rosemary molasses rolls. They were asking for Elowen. "Is she here today? Can she come say hi? Tell her that bread she made last week saved my Tuesday." Bo watched as Elowen, now wheeling more confidently than ever, rolled through the bakery-turned living room and greeted each person like they were an old friend. But something had shifted. She wasn't just part of the kitchen. She was the center of it. That Saturday, Mae Jenkins pulled Bo aside as he was boxing up a dozen orange cardamom buns. "You ever think about making this permanent?" she asked. "It is permanent," Bo said. Confused. "I mean a real storefront," Mae clarified. "Downtown. Lease the old florist shop. Make the hearth something this town can't ignore." Bo blinked. "That sounds enormous." "You're already feeding half the county from your porch," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Time to let the oven match the dream." Bo didn't answer right away, but the idea lodged in his chest like rising dough, quiet, warm, expanding by the hour. Later that night, Bo brought it up over dinner. He expected Elowen to hesitate, to question the risk. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "I've already sketched the layout." Bo blinked. "You what I've been dreaming about it," she said. "Double ovens, lowered counters for me, a chalkboard wall for the daily menu, and a corner just for Saffron to do homework or make a mess." Saffron grinned. "Can I also paint the wall?" Elowen chuckled. "Within reason." Bo looked between them and realized something he hadn't fully named until now. They weren't just surviving together. They were building a life, a business, a home. He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Elowen opened it slowly. Her breath caught. It was a lease application. The florist shop on Main Street. "Bo," she whispered. "I don't want to do it without you," he said. "I could, maybe. But I don't want to." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at the paper. "Let's build something they can't ignore," she said softly. 2 weeks later, the florist sign came down. The hearth moved into its new walls with the help of neighbors donated paint secondhand chairs and 3 dozen volunteers who insisted on taste testing every new menu item. The smell of cinnamon and yeast wrapped around the building like a welcome mat. Elowen oversaw the layout from her chair like a general marshalling troops. Bo handled the heavy lifting, and Saffron declared herself Minister of Joy, placing stickers on the register and naming the sourdough starter Waffles. On opening day, a local newspaper ran a feature story, "From Grief to Gratitude," the bakery that's feeding more than stomachs. Lines stretched down the block. People came for the food. Yes, but they stayed for what it represented. A woman who learned to stand in a world that told her she couldn't. A child who went from invisible to unforgettable. And a man who dared to love again through the language of bread. That night, after the last door locked and the last crumb was swept from the floor, Bo turned off the lights one by one. He found Elowen sitting at the front counter, the new sign behind her gleaming softly. The hearth, where every step is love. He poured 2 glasses of cider and handed her one. "We did it," he said. She smiled. "We are doing it." Then she added quieter, "And I think I want to learn to walk again." Bo didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. He just reached for her hand and held on. It was Saffron's idea. She had been unusually quiet one afternoon, sitting at the back corner of the bakery with a pencil in one hand and a blank index card in the other. Bo noticed her furrowed brow and the way her lips moved like she was rehearsing something under her breath. He let her be. When she finally approached the counter, cheeks flushed, she slid the card toward Elowen and said softly, "I want to tell people, all of them, about me." Elowen set down her spatula, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at the card. A simple title was written across the top in a child's slanted handwriting, "The Girl Who Wasn't Chosen, but Chose Herself." Beneath it was a short, handwritten note, not long, not fancy, but braver than anything Bo had ever read. Elowen read it once, then again, and by the time she lifted her head, there were tears caught in her lashes. Bo read it over her shoulder. "I'm Saffron Vale. My grandma once told me I wasn't really part of the family, but family isn't just names and blood. It's who shows up, who sees you, who lets you take up space. I used to think I had to earn love. Now I know better. Now I help bake it. And that's enough." The community potluck was already on the calendar. It had been Elowen's idea, a celebration of the first full month since the hearth opened on Main Street. She wanted it outside on the wide lawn in front of the bakery, with long tables, borrowed folding chairs, and enough shared dishes to make every guest feel at home. Bo had handled permits, food safety signage, and corralling local musicians. Saffron had painted a banner that stretched across the shop's awning. "You belong here." The morning of the event, the sky was blindingly blue. The ocean breeze carried the scent of lavender and rising dough. And Bo couldn't help but feel that this exact day was what they'd all been climbing toward without even knowing it. By 4 o'clock, the lawn was full. There were elders with walkers, teenagers with headphones, families with picnic blankets, and even a few tourists who wandered in, charmed by the music and the smell of roasted garlic and baked peaches. Saffron stood near the folding table where Bo and Elowen had laid out trays of olive focaccia, sweet corn muffins, and 4 dozen slices of buttermilk pie. Her eyes scanned the crowd like she was searching for someone. Or something. Bo approached with 2 lemonades and handed her one. "You nervous?" Saffron nodded. "A little, but also kinda strong." Bo smiled. "That's how you know it's the right time." A small bell rang above the bakery door. Elowen wheeled herself out, holding the recipe box, now polished and adorned with hand-painted flowers, courtesy of Saffron. She placed it gently on the table beside the pies. Bo noticed something tucked into the side of the box. Saffron's card, her story, right where everyone could see it. Bo's heart clenched with pride. As the sun dipped low and the music slowed to gentle strings, Elowen tapped a spoon against a glass and called the crowd to attention. "I wasn't sure I wanted to speak tonight," she said, "but I've learned that when your child finds their voice, you have to follow their lead." She looked over at Saffron, who stood barefoot in the grass arms slightly behind her back. "I used to think healing was something that happened in private," Elowen continued, "in small rooms with whispered hope. But I've come to believe that real healing happens in the open, when someone dares to say, 'This is who I am, and I'm not hiding anymore.'" She gestured to the recipe box. "There's a card in here tonight that didn't come from me, or Bo, or even his mother. It came from someone braver than any adult I know. And if you'll allow her, she'd like to read it to you." There was a beat of silence, then a wave of soft applause. Saffron stepped forward. Bo's chest was tight as he watched her climb the 3 wooden steps to the small porch, stage card in hand. She looked out over the sea of faces and took a deep breath. Then she read. Not rushed, not trembling. Clear. Steady. Honest. When she finished, the crowd didn't erupt. They didn't shout. What they did instead was more powerful. They stood. Every last person. And as Bo looked out over the lawn, he saw hands reach for hearts, eyes fill with tears, heads bow with reverence. They weren't clapping for pity. They were clapping for truth. Afterward, as the stars blinked awake and lanterns cast pools of amber across the tables, people approached Saffron one by one. A retired teacher who had once been adopted late in life. A middle-aged man raised by his older sister. A woman who had grown up in the foster system carrying her last name like a question mark. They told her their stories, and in return, she gave them slices of pie and hugs that felt like memory. Near midnight, Bo sat on the porch steps beside Elowen. The lawn was nearly empty now. A few folding chairs squeaked in the wind, and a crumpled paper napkin danced near the curb. She did it, he whispered. She is doing it, Elowen said. And because she did, I think I can too. Bo turned. What do you mean? Elowen reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Bo. It was a name change request. Signed. Filed. Official. I've carried the Veil name out of fear, she said. Obligation. Habit. But tonight reminded me, we get to choose who we are. Bo stared at the form emotions tangling in his throat. What name will you use? He asked. She smiled. My grandmother's. The one who taught me to knead dough and hold my head high. She took a deep breath. I'm Elowen Hart now. Bo reached for her hand. It fits you, he said. She looked at him, eyes glinting with something unspoken. You fit me, she whispered. Then she leaned in and kissed him, not like a question, not like a maybe, but like a yes. Bo didn't sleep that night. Not because of restlessness, but because peace, when it finally arrives, is too rare to waste on dreams. He stayed on the porch long after Elowen went inside, the echo of her kiss still warm against his lips. It hadn't been rushed or hesitant. It had been rooted like her, like the woman she had become after years of being told she wasn't enough. He watched the moonlight spill across the recipe box that still sat on the porch table. Saffron had tucked her story card inside behind Harvest Heartbread, as if it belonged there all along. Bo exhaled slowly, a whisper of air he didn't know he'd been holding for years. Tomorrow, he would tell her. Not just that he loved her, but that she'd brought his heart back from a silence so long he'd thought it was permanent. The next morning, he rose early. The beach mist still hugged the sand like a secret, and the bakery lights glowed soft and golden. He took down the closed for restocking sign they'd hung for the weekend and replaced it with a fresh one he'd written himself, Special Celebration Menu Today. Come taste something new. Inside, Elowen was already at the counter, her hair pulled back, loosely apron tied high. There was a glow in her face, not the kind makeup could mimic, but the kind born from inner steadiness. She looked up as Bo entered, a slow smile spreading. You're up early, she said. He set his keys down, crossed to her, and handed her a single recipe card. It was blank, but at the top in Bo's careful handwriting was the title, The First Kiss and Everything After. Elowen blinked, then laughed softly. You're writing recipes now. I figured if love could start in a kitchen, maybe it deserved a card of its own. She stared at the card fingers brushing the edge. Bo took her hand. I love you, Elle. I've loved you since the night you tried to pretend you didn't need help, but let me carry your groceries anyway. Her eyes sparkled. And I've loved you since you handed a little girl cocoa like it was the most important thing in the world. He leaned in and kissed her again this time, with no doubt between them. Just flour and fire and future. Saffron burst into the kitchen 15 minutes later, shoeless and breathless, carrying a stack of drawings. "I made a new logo," she announced, holding up a crayon masterpiece of a loaf of bread with a heart in the middle, and what looked suspiciously like 3 stick figures, Bo, Elowen, and her standing under it. Elowen chuckled. "That's beautiful, honey." Bo ruffled her hair. "I think we've just found our new house seal. I even have a new idea for a menu item," Saffron added. "Something sweet and a little spicy." Bo raised an eyebrow. Yep." She held up a second drawing. "Cinnamon Love Twists. It's like a cinnamon roll but twisty. And we shape it like hearts." Elowen looked at Bo. "I think we've created a monster." He laughed. "A brilliant, unstoppable monster." The hearth buzzed with quiet energy all afternoon. The regulars came early, drawn in by the promise of a celebration menu. Bo introduced the new item, Saffron's Cinnamon Love Twists, served warm with a drizzle of cardamom glaze. They sold out in an hour. But the real surprise came just after 3 o'clock, when a courier walked in, holding a large white envelope. He asked for Elowen by her old name, Elowen Vale, which made Bo's stomach drop for just a second. Elowen took the envelope, thanked the courier, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. And a check. Mirabelle Vale's signature was scrawled at the bottom. Bo stepped closer, concerned. "What is it?" Elowen read silently for a long time. Then she folded the letter, slid it into her apron, and handed Bo the check. Made out to the hearth. Amount $25,000. Bo's eyes widened. "She's funding us." Elowen shook her head. "She's absolving herself. That's not the same thing. What do you want to do with it?" Elowen paused. "I think we frame it. Hang it in the bathroom." Bo blinked. The bathroom. As a reminder, she said that what tried to flush us away couldn't. He laughed so hard he had to sit down. Saffron, watching from behind the counter, grinned and added it to her drawing a framed check above a toilet. That evening, they hosted a soft dinner invitation only. Mae Jenkins, the city librarian, the local grocer's wife, even the music teacher who'd once discouraged Elowen's ambition, all gathered at long wooden tables. Bo and Saffron had sanded and painted by hand. They served roasted butternut squash soup, warm apple cheddar biscuits, and for dessert, a single dish. The first kiss and everything after. It was a variation on Bo's mother's butter rum cake lighter, with lemon zest and a hint of raspberry reduction. Sweet with depth, familiar, but new. Bo plated each slice himself. Elowen watched from the window, her eyes misting when she heard a guest say, "I think this tastes like falling in love." At the end of the night, Elowen stood and gave a toast, but instead of lifting a glass, she lifted Saffron's, drawing the one with the bread heart and 3 stick figures. "This," she said, "voice steady, is our real logo. A little crooked, a little colorful, but full of heart, full of story." She looked at Bo, and full of beginnings. Bo took her hand as the room applauded. Later that night, the 3 of them stood in the kitchen barefoot, laughing over a spilled jar of flour. Bo looked at the mess and sighed. "Do we clean or just embrace the chaos?" Elowen grinned. "Both. Always both." And Saffron, arms stretched wide, declared, "This is what forever feels like." Bo looked at her, then at Elowen. And for the first time in his life, he agreed completely with a kid covered in sugar. Autumn settled over the town with the quiet confidence of something that had nothing left to prove. The wind turned crisp. Leaves rustled like old songs down Main Street. And at the corner of Juniper and Ellis, the hearth stood warm and golden, spilling the scent of cinnamon-browned butter and honeyed apples onto the sidewalk. Inside the bakery had become more than a kitchen. It was a kind of sanctuary. Each corner held a story. The shelf near the register displayed a growing collection of thank you notes and photos left by guests. The chalkboard wall bore Saffron's ever-changing doodles and daily affirmations. Today's read: "You matter more than you know, and we made pie." The community now called the trio by a kind of folklore shorthand, Bo and Elowen, and the girl with the apron full of truth. And on this day, 1 year since the girl first scrubbed floors in silence, and 1 year since a man dared to say, "This is not okay," a new chapter quietly unfurled. They had planned a small celebration, just a few regulars, some warm cider, a caramel pear tart with Saffron's name written in icing. But when Bo arrived to unlock the door that morning, there were flowers on the steps. Dozens. Wrapped in parchment, tucked in mason jars tied with twine and paper tags. Each one had a note. "Thank you for seeing us. You made us believe in good people again. This is more than bread. It's home." Bo stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. Elowen came up beside him, lips parted in quiet wonder. And then Saffron ran down the street, her backpack bouncing, cheeks flushed. "I saw them from 2 blocks away," she shouted. "Is it like a flash mob for kindness?" Elowen laughed. "It just might be." Bo cleared his throat. "I guess the town remembered." "No," Saffron said, beaming. "They never forgot." That afternoon, Elowen wheeled herself onto the porch and unwrapped a package she'd been waiting months to open. Bo stood beside her. Saffron bounced impatiently on her toes. Inside was the final piece, a handcrafted wooden sign carved by a local artisan, sealed and painted in gold. They lifted it together, mounted it just above the front door, and stepped back to admire the words, "The Hearth, where every step is love." There were no speeches, no cameras, just 3 people, once broken, now whole, watching the sunlight catch on letters that had grown from flour and fire and fearless honesty. As the sun dipped low, the front door opened again, and a familiar face stepped into the doorway. It was Juniper. Bo recognized her first, taller now, more grown up, dressed in a soft blue coat, and holding something in her hands, a sketchbook. Saffron went still beside him. Juniper looked nervous, but determined. "Hi," she said. "I saw the article. About everything." Elowen stepped forward slowly, her voice calm. "You're always welcome here." Juniper's eyes filled. "I didn't know back then. I thought I was the lucky one. But turns out you were." She handed Saffron the sketchbook. "These are for you. Recipes I made up. I don't know if they're good, but they're yours now." Saffron opened the book and gasped. Dozens of drawings, notes, flavors, ideas, some silly, some inspired. She hugged her cousin without hesitation. "I've got one," Saffron said brightly. "It's called Cousin's Crumble. We make it together." You and Juniper nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm in." Bo stepped back into the bakery, watching the scene unfold. 1 year ago, a girl had been scrubbed out of sight. Today, she was welcoming someone in. That evening, Bo prepared one last surprise. He waited until the bakery had emptied, and the porch was lit only by soft string lights swaying in the wind. He took Elowen's hand and led her inside. On the main bakery wall above the recipe box was a new frame. Inside it, a carefully pressed linen napkin, and stitched into the cloth in Saffron's handwriting were the words, "Her floor no more." Elowen gasped. "Where did you—" "I kept the first apron she wore," Bo said softly. "The one she tied with string. I asked May to help me save it." Elowen touched the frame like it held a holy relic. She never belonged on a floor. "No," Bo said. But she needed to know someone would kneel for her first. Elowen turned toward him. "You gave us both more than a second chance." Bo shook his head. "You gave me one. And now—" He knelt. Not to fix something, not to rescue, but to propose. From his pocket he pulled a small, simple ring. handmade, a soft gold band set with a fleck of beach glass, green and luminous. He looked up at her heart steady. "Elowyn Hart," he said, "will you marry me, not to save you, not to complete you, but to walk beside you for every single imperfect, beautiful step we've got left?" Her hands flew to her mouth. She whispered, "Yes." Then louder, "Yes. Beau. Yes." Beau rose. They kissed, and behind them from the kitchen door, Saffron shouted, "About time." Weeks passed. Leaves fell. The air sharpened. And on a quiet December morning, under a trellis of pine and cinnamon sticks, Beau and Elowyn said, "I do behind the bakery." The whole town came. Saffron stood proudly between them, holding the rings and wearing an apron that read, "Head Baker." Assistant Flower Girl. Miracle Witness. Their vows were simple. Their kiss was not. The hearth glowed long into the night. Candles lined the windows. Music poured from an old record player. People danced, ate, cried, and came back for thirds. And no one wanted to leave. Because they weren't just there for cake. They were there to honor something rare. A girl who found her name. A woman who stood again. And a man who opened his arms and let a miracle walk in with muddy shoes and a recipe box full of second chances. On the final page of the bakery's guest book, a visitor left this note: "I came for the cinnamon twists. I stayed, because this place taught me I'm still allowed to believe in people." And just like that, a little girl who once scrubbed floors found herself standing tall, surrounded by love, laughter, and the kind of family that didn't come from blood, but from choice. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Whether you're tuning in from a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between, your presence here means more than you know. Feel free to share in the comments below. And if stories of kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. From our little corner of the internet to wherever you are, you belong here.